I'm George Galloway, and I present Kalima Horra on Almayadeen television. Here we are in London. I speak my words freely, either in Parliament, on television, here on the streets of London. Kalima Horra means free word. That's what I speak. So Kalima Horra is a two-way conversation. Check it out on Almayadeen television. Welcome to Kalima Horra. With me, George Galloway, on Almayadeen television, coming to you from London, but discussing the world of social media. Although I don't look old enough, when I started in politics, in order to get a political message onto what was then 2 television stations, or through several hostile editors of billionaire-owned newspapers, we had to sit at a typewriter, remember them, and punch through a skin on that typewriter, then put that skin on a cylinder of ink. Anyone know what ink is? And then turn a handle and produce pieces of paper and cut that paper into 4, then go out onto the street and hand it to surprised, sometimes bemused passers-by to convey a political message. I've now lived through what is an entirely revolutionary age whereby there are hundreds of television stations, including this one, putting out a view which the powerful and the wealthy in the world don't want people to see, and on social media itself, a revolutionary transformation. I myself have 1.5 million followers on social media. I can send them a message, and I do, apologies if you're fed up, every day, all day, whenever I please. And that social media revolution has shaken the power of those that once had monopoly ownership of the means of distribution of ideas. However, they have begun to fight back. They have begun, through their now monopoly ownership of social media platforms, to censor people of inconvenient points of view, close down some of these hundreds of new alternative television stations, using their power over satellites and over regulators to try and choke back on this new revolutionary era. In the United States, whole operations with hundreds of thousands of followers are routinely closed down. On Twitter, individuals of inconvenient cast of mind are easily censored. For someone like me, with such a huge audience, that is not yet a problem, because it would be too controversial to try and close me down. But it might come, of course, to that. Perhaps when you get big enough, the incentive to close you down becomes all the more powerful. So, social media, friend or foe? Social media, a revolutionary tool in the hands of the masses all over the world? Or just a fleeting moment of time in which, for a limited period, the people were free? I'm joined by an audience of distinguished experts and 1 or 2 enthusiastic amateurs like me. My first guest is the Dean of Arab Journalism. I call him the last Arab. Of course, he's not actually the last, but if, la samahallah, it ever comes to there being a last Arab, it will be him. He used to be the editor of a newspaper, you know, the things they used to cut trees down for, which made him the best known Arab journalist in the world. Not a crowded field, actually, if you consider the situation in many of the Arab countries. But now he's online, and his audience is bigger than ever. He is, of course, the legendary Abdel Bari Atwan. Welcome, Abdel Bari, to the stage. You started out in print, like me. Now you're a social media giant. Describe for us what that transformation was like, good and bad, and what, if anything, you fear for the future of that media.
Thank you, George. We know each other for years, fighting, demonstrating, and actually...
More than 40 years, I'm sorry to tell you.
No, when you were 3 years of age, that's why. It is a very, very difficult journey. I was always actually dedicated to the traditional media, to the printed media. But after a lot of struggle, a lot of suffering because of the pressure of the people you refer to, those people who don't want us to express our point of view, I came to this country looking for the freedom of expression, and I can see the ceiling now is lower and lower and lower. So I thought maybe, I can take refuge to the social media. I thought maybe the social media will be the freer or the best in order to get rid of this censorship you have mentioned. But unfortunately, I noticed recently that we were actually naive. I believe now the social media actually infiltrated and it is actually censored to the way, alarming way. Yeah, they want to suffocate us. If you notice recently, George, many activists, Palestinian activists, Islamic activists in particular, they were actually black out completely from the social media because the superpowers or the super actually rich or the super capitalists, they don't want them to express their views. The magic words for those people is Israel, Hezbollah, freedom of expression, freedom fighters. For me, I was shocked recently. I have on the social media, on the Facebook, a page, more than 1 million. I'm not activist at the Facebook. Suddenly, blackout. Suddenly, suspended. And another one, which was personal one, again suspended and blacked out. Wow. So, why? I have millions. You said, if you have millions of followers or, a huge amount of followers, maybe they will stay away from you. Once I asked, the first warning came to me simply because I wrote an article about Hezbollah and Hassan Nasrallah. And they said, this was in 2015. And they said, recently we noticed that you are actually breaking the rules of the Facebook, so we have to omit this, and then the suspension of my pages, and it never came back.
Oh, really?
Seriously. So I feel that we are targeted. So I wasn't surprised when The Guardian, in an investigative report last week, said that, there are pages used for spread hate campaign against Muslims and against, third world people and against dignitaries also like Ilhan Omar, like Jeremy Corbyn. Many, and you named it, Rashida Tlaib, also another Congress member. So it seems now situation is changed, the scene is changed. Even they closed President Assad of Syria page on the Facebook simply because he criticized the Rai television station in Italy because they did not screen an interview which conducted with him. I think now the time when we thought that the social media will be alternative to the traditional media, I think it is passing. They're closing now pages. Once, it was ridiculous. They said we closed Benjamin Netanyahu page. It was for 1 day in order to cover what they are doing to our pages. So I wouldn't be surprised if more of people like you, George, like me, they will be blacked out completely from the social media because they don't want our opinion to reach its destination. I have 2.1 million followers on Twitter. It is frightening for them. Why I should have 2.1 million on Twitter? Who I am in their eyes? My name maybe is not Atwan. It doesn't mean anything for them. It means Muslims. It means Arabs. It means even highly educated person. Okay, I used to lecture on most of universities in this country, in the United States, in Europe. Blackout. Suddenly, I am not invited. Even in the media here, into ITV, Channel 4, BBC, everywhere. I used to be like actually, what you call it, and everywhere, literally. If you open the fridge, you will find Bari Atwan there. So now it's, suddenly simply because I am criticizing United States. If you criticize United States, if you criticize the United States policies, if you criticize Israel, if you mention or analyze what Hassan Nasrallah is saying, for example, of Hezbollah, you are an enemy. This is the story. I believe I wouldn't be surprised if more accounts closed in the social media. I wouldn't be surprised if actually more victims like me and like others who are going to suffer. We have to look for a different media. We have to look for different social media. I hope the Chinese will come out with something different as a parallel to this. I hope the Russian coming with another social media so we can actually find at least a safer place for the time being until the end of our life. I hope so. I pray for that simply because we had enough. Seriously, the social media, which has a huge reputation, we are actually saying completely different one. We shouldn't actually bank on that because time is actually changing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I was unaware of the extent of censorship of you, for which I reproach myself because I don't read Arabic and I'm not following what's happening to Arabic speakers and Arabic writers closely enough. You're a social media expert, sir. What can be done? Can Russia, China, others launch their own platforms? I mean, it seems to me obvious that they can. It's really just a blackboard. It's about attracting people to that blackboard. Is this a fundamental, existential problem, or is it one that can be resolved?
My name's Shehram Malik. I'm a cybersecurity and network expert. The first point we've got to really understand is that when social media really kicked off in the early 2000s, it was a platform that was mostly designed as a free-for-all, and people were contributing. And it was designed for people in universities to communicate with one another, Facebook being an example. Then as it grew over a longer period of time, and it went PLC, public limited companies, then people who couldn't control social media were able to buy into social media. For example, good gentleman here spoke about Twitter. Do you know who the second biggest shareholder in Twitter is?
Is it Facebook?
It's the Saudi royal family.
Oof.
Walid bin Talal is the second biggest shareholder in Twitter. And conveniently, he bought his shares in 2011, and everyone here knows what happened in 2011, the Arab Spring. And the driver for the Arab Spring and people getting together was Twitter at the time, not Facebook. Now, another important question is, it's not only suppressing free speech, there are alternatives. What social media has started doing now and over the past 4 years is actually designing your opinion. They are creating opinion now. So what you might deem to be free speech that you put out on social media is actually not free speech. They have made you think that way. Read the details about what Cambridge Analytica used to do. Right? That is far more dangerous. They use really complex algorithms designed to pick out words, keywords, right, that are meant to affect you as an individual. So it's all targeted. So that's one point. And very slow, all these servers reside in the United States where they analyze content, they look at videos that are there, they look at pictures that you put up with geolocation. Experts say is they're able to build your psychometric profile up to 95% accuracy. So they know who you are as an individual, what your habits are, right? What you're likely to do if you are told to do something. What is your reaction going to be when you're asked to do something. And I will give one example which should shock people. In 2014, there was an attack on a school in Pakistan, very close to where my family comes from. 132 children were slaughtered. So I put out 2 poems on my Facebook page. It was a very sad time for everyone concerned. What I noticed straight away was the advertisement that I was receiving on Facebook changed. So there were more children in all the advertisement that I was receiving. Even if it was for buying mobile phones or covers for mobile phones, it had pictures of children. Because they knew that impacted me as an individual more. And that's what they did with the Trump campaign, and that's exactly what they did with the Brexit campaign. They targeted individuals with this. Now, Russia and China might come out with these platforms. Right? China already has this because China
But not in English.
Not in English, in Chinese. It's very easy for them to come out in English as well. But the point is, they've already put precautions in place to suppress dissent. That's already there. They already have it. So even if they come out with it, it's not that they're going to allow for free speech. It will be a competition. America will allow accounts that are against Russia to say what they like, and Russia is going to do the same thing. You know, you might be able to say one thing on one platform, but not the same thing on the other platform. And now the other problem is the use of mobile phone. Mobile phones give away your life to not only social media platforms, but the service providers, the people that you use to connect out to the internet. They know exactly what you're doing. They know exactly where you are, right? And they know exactly what you're trying to do. So the concept of big data, data mining, is designed to do this. It's designed to make a profile of your life and then sell that information to advertisers, to companies. They say on average, data mining increases net revenue by 65 million. And at the moment, because there is so much of it, only 0.5% of that data is being used today. So just a trip to the shopping center is tracked. When you connect to the free Wi-Fi there, right, you're tracked.
Nothing's free.
Nothing's free, right? That data, so straight away, when you connect to that free Wi-Fi, the shopping center, or people who control the shopping center, they know what type of mobile phone you have. They know that straight away. So they know, they can pretty much guess how much disposable income you have. So as you move through the shopping center where you spend most of your time, then they can build that profile of yours and sell that to companies so they can use these social media platforms to then advertise very targeted, very specific adverts to you as an individual.
You know, personally, I have no problem with any of that. I'm advertised to by all kinds of medium. I'm more concerned about censorship of political opinion. And that, in a sense, is far more pernicious than, you know, a bookstore or a clothes store knowing you're in the building, isn't it?
It's all related. So when they have your profile, that profile also tells them what your political leanings are, what you're likely to say on social media. Based on that, they're going to censor it, but why are some accounts censored and others left open? For example, let's go back to March of this year, when the attack happened on 2 mosques in New Zealand. This guy had been saying this on social media. He was threatening to attack mosques. He broadcast that live on his Facebook, but Facebook wasn't able to pick that up. Now, to me, you know, somebody who is in the industry, right, their excuses were just that. They were excuses. There was a deliberate attempt not to close that account down, not to warn the authorities that this guy might do this. All the excuses they gave were baseless. Because if you did it, if you did something like that, they would close your account tomorrow. Why wasn't his account closed?
Very good and interesting point. there's not a lot of time left in this segment, so I'll bring you back in later. But let me infer that you're not a radical sort of fellow. I know you well. You're an interesting and unpredictable one. You don't take, set lines.
I hope I'm independent, George.
Even someone like you worry about this trend?
I am, and I'm just going to make the point, because I think the really key point is that social media isn't free. They're mining our data. They're computers in the Arizona desert or wherever they may be who know more about us than we do. And it's also not free in the sense of self-expression. Now, George, you and I are friends. We're politically very different, but we've both experienced society's control over free speech and free thought. Now, this has taken very direct effect on me recently. For example, on Facebook, my Facebook page was closed down, and I wasn't happy. I was just normal journalistic comment, but someone somewhere didn't like it. And I did know someone who knew someone who worked at Facebook, and I managed to get my page put up with an apology. And if anyone goes to Michael Yardley on Facebook, they will see the apology, which is a very rare thing, from Facebook, saying the material had been taken down in error. Now, more recently, I had a poll up on Brexit on Twitter. As I watched, something like 12,500 people had voted in it. As I watched, 10,000 plus votes disappeared from my Twitter poll. Luckily, I took a screenshot as this was happening with a time code. Then that poll went down from, let's say, 12,500 votes to 897 votes on the same Twitter time code as I was watching. I have had dozens of cases of tweets that appear to have been removed with this material is no longer available. Sometimes I've been able to get back to them, but it's very disturbing. Dozens of people have messaged to me saying that they've had problems accessing my material. This is a daily reality, and the real problem is that both Facebook and Twitter do not tell us what their procedures and protocols are. This is all done at a covert level. It's secretly done without explanation. When the 10,000 votes disappeared from my poll, no explanation at all. I just happened to be watching, and I just happened to take a picture of it. And if people go to my Twitter account tonight, I will put that data up again so you can see it for yourselves.
Now that we know that one of the Saudi royal family is the biggest, second biggest, did you say, shareholder in Twitter, that will explain a lot of things to a lot of people. I myself did not know that. Do you think the owners are actually demanding that their staff police people like you, people like Mr. Atwan, people like me, or is this the staff trying to be, if you'll forgive the pun, more royal than the king?
I'm not sure. I've put a lot of intellectual effort into thinking about the BBC recently. And to me, the BBC has become the church as it was in the Middle Ages. It has become a political entity of sorts in its own right. So it's trying to, it's accruing all of this power to itself, and then it can do whatever it wants to do. So it's about being powerful. I would guess, George, it's the same with social media, that they are just trying to become powerful, because as they become more powerful, they become more valuable. And when you look at anything in modern life, I'm afraid, it's usually one way or another driven by money. But for intellectuals and people with political views like you and me, that are a little bit different perhaps to the mainstream, it is critical in a free society that people like us can keep expressing ourselves without hindrance.
Much more of this coming up in the second half. You're watching Kalima Horra with me, George Galloway, on Almayadeen television, discussing the world of social media, how it transformed things and how it might now be being transformed in a very different way. We took the Kalima Horra camera onto the streets of London to see what the people thought. Let's take a look.
Have you heard that some Twitter and Facebook accounts have been blocked recently?
Yes, I have, yeah. And that's wrong.
I've heard of it, yeah. Not in a huge amount of detail, but I did learn that it was
It was mostly on specific issues, especially related to the foreign policy of certain countries, like for instance the Israel-Palestine issue. I know a lot of accounts have been shut down, mostly on like due to accusations of like anti-Semitism.
Yeah, I have. And I think it's a matter of free speech. I think it depends. So, like, if it's something offensive, then I think there should be some filtration. But if it's journalism and it's about a minority, and if it's going to help a social movement, then I don't think that should be filtered out. I think that should be open.
Yeah, I've heard about these stuff. Yeah, that shouldn't happen because it's a social media platform, and social media means that everybody should have their own opinions and views.
Recently, former US Defense Secretary John Bolton claimed that the White House shut down his Twitter account. Now, what does this say?
I think that it's showing that governments are starting more of a crackdown on free speech and that there's increased censorship. I mean, obviously the US is one of the most powerful states, if not the most powerful state in the world. So if they're doing it, what's stopping other states from following?
We have a right of freedom of speech, and the government is not in reason to remove that from people.
I think it is a type of imposing powers.
Like large social media companies are in cooperation right now because the companies feel the pressure from the governments. If they want to operate in these territories, then they need to kowtow to the demands of the governments, and they are not just towing the line, they're going beyond what is required of them, and none of them have any commitment to ensuring free speech survives. Their primary motive is to ensure that their profits remain good.
So just what would be your reaction if, let's say, one day you woke up and you were sort of restricted in your use of social media for making political points? I mean, how would you react to that?
Well, I think it would be absolutely outrageous. I wouldn't be happy. I would be vocal about it. Obviously I'd be looking for alternative platforms on which I could explain this and say, look, this has been done wrong.
Like, I'll be feeling helpless, like literally. I can ask my friends to raise my voice on their platforms, but let's imagine even they end up getting their accounts blocked or shut down.
What all internet users must look into is moving beyond the large platforms which are driven by Silicon Valley and profit motives.
Mike Yardley, people talked about their right to free speech there. As a matter of fact, in Britain, you don't have a right to free speech. We have no constitution. That's not enshrined anywhere. There are already legal restrictions on what a person can say freely. One may not, for example, say things that will incite racial hatred or hatred against people of any particular type. But in the United States, they do have a constitutional right to freedom of speech. And yet there you heard that John Bolton, the former National Security Advisor, himself was stopped from freely speaking by the President of the United States. That's a troubling development.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, of course, we hear a lot about the Second Amendment in the US, the right to keep and bear arms. We hear far less about the First Amendment, which is all about free speech. And yes, I tend to agree. We could almost do with the First Amendment here. I still think we do have free speech in the UK, and I'm passionate about preserving it. But there are more and more constraints upon it. Legal constraints, the constraints of libel, all sorts of other stuff that's come in, particularly in the last couple of decades. And it is a problem. You can't really say what you feel. Even political correctness is a restraint on speech.
This is self-censorship,
yes,
isn't it?
But it is a problem that
what
people
Francis
do not
Bacon
feel
called
free
the arrow
to,
that flies in the night.
They think twice before speaking now.
Yes.
That's a bad sign in any society.
Yeah.
And I think we've got to move away from that. And I think that people do want to be free, but they also are manipulated. And as we've seen with the social media, people are manipulated to an unbelievable extent now. Facebook and other social media companies have done experiments, depending on what they put in your feed, what they put in the ads, to manipulate you at a psychological level, either to buy something or to make a political decision. This is really impacting on our democracy, and we are not taking enough notice yet.
James, you don't even know what a typewriter is, never mind a stencil or a drum full of ink. You are the perfect example of the millennial used to and adept in social media. Do you feel any of these kind of pressures?
Absolutely. So I stood in the recent general election, and as is common in modern political campaigning, social media advertising forms a part of that. And it's not just the big names with loads of followers that are being censored. It's even people like myself on a minuscule level. So I'll give you an example. I wanted to boost a post on Facebook. So I put an advertisement out within a certain area. And the topic was actually about a rubbish bin that was along our shopping centre and on the high street that was just not being emptied. And Facebook refused to allow it to be shared more widely on the grounds that...
Even though you were ready to pay for it?
Even though I was willing to pay for it. Yeah, I was willing to put £15 into sharing this with a wider audience. And they said, no, you can't. If you want to share this on a wider level with us, we want to see your passport, we want to see 2 utility bills, and then we'd like to know why you want to share it with a wider area, which just seemed absolutely ridiculous. And then what follows on from that is, after saying, right, okay, here's my passport, here's my utility bills, very begrudgingly, I might add, they then turned around and said, okay, it will now take us 3 days to determine whether or not your post meets our community guidelines. And so, just as you were saying back in the old days, you'd have to typewrite a press release, send it off to the editor, and if this billionaire editor didn't like what you had to say, then they wouldn't publish it in the paper. Well, just as that happened years ago, today, if you want to write something on Facebook, and Facebook doesn't like what you have to say, they can turn around and say, no, you don't meet our code of conduct, or, just as in the old days, you don't meet our editorial viewpoints. We're not going to publish it.
Orwellian control.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
And it's just absolutely ludicrous, and it absolutely is censorship of free speech. It's absolutely mad.
Let's hear from the young gentleman here. How is social media for you?
Hi, my name is Hussein. So I'm an avid social media user. I've got Twitter, I've got Instagram, YouTube, Snapchat, you name it. And I think there's definitely a growth in the use of social media, but I don't think it's as much as we would like to believe, especially in the UK, where we saw with the recent general election.
What a very good point.
And you know what? When you're on social media, it's a bubble. It's a totally different world to when you actually go outside and you actually have a conversation with people. So I went canvassing for the Labour Party, and when I was on social media, I was thinking, you know what? There might be a chance, And then you go out there, you talk to people, and there's completely different opinions on what they think. Because you think to yourself, wow, there's so many left-wing people here, there's so many Corbyn supporters here, but that's not the case at all. And we need to get rid of that mindset, because at the moment we're thinking social media has a lot of influence on us, but how are we choosing to react to the platforms? How are we choosing to react to the ads that we're being targeted by? How are we choosing to be influenced by these things in the first place? So we have the actual choice to not have a victim mentality and say, you know what, as much as we're targeted by these ads, we have the choice to refuse these ads. We have the choice to be refused to be targeted by these things, and I think it's so important.
Well, I've got to tell you, that's one of the most important contributions that has happened so far in the program. Social media is a bubble, an echo chamber, and the British general election is the best possible example of that. If you had followed social media on election day, you thought there were long queues at all the polling stations. But of course, that was only in 1 or 2, I could even name them, London, middle class, prosperous, pro-EU constituencies. In the polling places in the rain in the Midlands, there were no queues at all. And whilst on social media you felt that Jeremy Corbyn was storming to a youthquake victory, out in the country, of course, it was precisely the reverse. So that is an additional factor into this debate. Perhaps we're paying too much attention to social media. Perhaps we're allowing social media to confirm our pre-existing viewpoints and prejudices. Abdel Bari.
I'm just going to say en route, I was monitoring social media all the way through the election, and it gave me a completely false picture of what was happening. I saw all those cues that you saw. I saw all the stuff that was coming out on the HuffPost, for example, and I got completely the wrong idea of what was actually happening in reality.
Yeah, to be honest, I got the same impression like you, George, here. I thought maybe people will be influenced by the social media. But it seems, there are a curtain here. There is a blockage. If certain point of views are not allowed to reach its destination. I know in my website, my online newspaper, sometimes my articles, my editorials is completely blocked. It's not allowed to reach the people.
Is that everywhere in the world, or as it used to be with your paper, in certain countries, they simply didn't allow it to enter?
It is worse, George. For example, now, for one of my editorials, for example, used to gain 180,000 readers. Suddenly, it is curtailed to 4,000. How it comes, to have 180,000 and suddenly only 4,000. It means there are people behind the scenes saying this point of view should not reach its destination.
You're the expert now. Tell us how that is actually done. How do they achieve that?
Okay, so right. Without getting too technical, I'll try and explain it simply. You have your address at home. The same way, when you connect to the internet, you have an address. When you register a website, that website has, so when you type in xyandz.com, it actually translates to what we call an IP address, something looking like 213.154.1.3. Now, those IP addresses are regionalized. So it is an organization called IANA that is responsible for allocating those IP addresses per region. They can't be allocated in another region. So they are all unique. So through the wizardry of the internet, anybody sitting anywhere else knows exactly where that information has come from. So those IP addresses are then allocated to regional service providers, and service providers then in turn give it to individuals. So the way they do it is, in some countries, they will restrict content based on the source IP address. So if I'm trying to access his website, for example, the government within the UK can restrict what I can access on that website based on where I'm coming from. That's why you see a lot of adverts for VPNs, for example. So what they do is they give you secure access to other countries, where when you browse the internet, you're not actually presenting a UK IP address, you could be presenting a Thai IP address. So on the Thai IP address, that content might be allowed. So internet itself can be very restrictive if the people behind the scenes want it to be.
Very interesting. I didn't know that. Joshua?
Yeah, I was going to say that in relation to what this gentleman at the front row said, that, people sort of surround themselves in, like-minded opinions. They can't tolerate a different one. Now, of course, you have to, there is a sort of like a yardstick for that. Obviously, if someone's trying to spread hatred, incite hatred, or say something really, really deeply repugnant and offensive, then it's best to either unfollow them or block them. Maybe report them if you're that concerned about their sort of activities. But, some people just cannot disagree on, and nowhere is this more evident than on social media. I got into an argument with someone about Brexit, and of course, naturally, they got annoyed, a bit wound up. I wasn't trying to wind them up. I was just, countering what they said, disagreeing with what they said, and they blocked me. It just goes to show that social media really does wrap some people up in a bubble. Politics is definitely, one of those contexts of it. The reason why it restricts free speech on a sort of intrapersonal psychological level is because we want to be bombarded with only what we agree with and what we want to see in the way we want to see it. And unfortunately, I think the social media users, for all the censorship and all the manipulation that the media has meted out to us, I do think that we largely, partly, not predominantly, but at least partially have ourselves to blame for our own lack of open-mindedness and our sort of, our sensitivities. And we've got to remember that, I always say that opinions are only the way you want to see things. The important thing is to be able to back up that opinion. And unfortunately, social media, far from facilitating that, to an extent, it has actually done the opposite. So yeah.
Fatima, back row.
I think it's very important to understand when we have this conversation on free speech and social media that apart from just influential people or people with a lot of following like yourself, like the many gentlemen sitting here, it's actually the very vulnerable people sitting at homes, the common person that gets the most affected. I myself am only a freelance journalist from Pakistan with about, if I had to give you a figure, I have about 1,500 followers on Twitter. But I've seen that whether it's with regards to my opinion on, say, something like the Uyghur Muslims in China, or an article I wrote about 2 years ago on the Khashoggi incident, for instance, immediately they are taken down. And I often think to myself whether it's actual Twitter policy.
Is it explained that they have been taken down and a reason given, or they just disappear?
No, they just disappear. Like somebody mentioned, it says that the content is now unavailable. So I wondered to myself whether it's Pakistani state policies that are governing what I can post on Twitter, or whether it's just general Twitter like policies. Like somebody mentioned, if it's owned by the second biggest stakeholder is a member of the royal family. And my second point is going to be with regards to Kashmir, for instance. It's one thing for the Modi regime in India to take down every single article that is ever to be written on the Kashmiri descent, what's going on. It's about 130 days, I think, today that the Black Town has manifested in. But to think of taking down complete social media access from these people in Kashmir, if you look at the demographics of Srinagar, about 45% of the people actually had no access to Wi-Fi to begin with. But to take away even like apart from the internet access, their 3G access, their mobile use, their network devices, any kind of mechanism that they had just to be able to be in touch with, say, family or to be able to watch television, I wonder what is the point of taking down somebody's television access if you are trying to cut down on their descent, or if you're trying to cut down on, their...
It's likely to have the opposite effect.
Exactly. So I think the Kashmir issue is a case study that is
it's
very poignant.
Good that you reminded us of it. Abdel Bari, back to you. I'm not suggesting that Prince Walid personally is blocking your output, though it wouldn't surprise me if he did, because you are a trenchant critic of the regime in Saudi Arabia, as you've been a trenchant critic of many, maybe most regimes in the Arab world. I suppose one could take the view, well, if I own a platform, why should I let you use my platform to blackguard me? Set up your own platform if you want to do that. In a way you have, haven't you? Because people read your newspaper online. Is even that interrupted by censorship?
To be honest, George, I'm not surprised because Saudi Arabia blocked my online newspaper. Always. And actually, they launched a hate campaign against me. They have the so-called electronic army. Thousands of people are working that to tarnish the image of anybody who is actually accusing or criticizing the Saudi regime. But I don't believe Walid bin Talal will actually block my site, whether on Facebook or on Twitter, simply because he is in deep trouble. He was actually arrested and stripped of most of his...
He was hanged upside down.
Exactly.
Until his ill-gotten gains fell out of his pocket and his own family stole it.
Exactly, and he is not allowed to leave his country. He is under house arrest in a way or another. So he is in trouble.
It's a big house.
It is. Well, yeah, it is a paradise. Yeah, it's not like your house or mine.
Who needs to leave it?
But you know what amazed me actually? What amazed me? It is United States. You mention it, George, which is supposed to be the leader of the free world. I know Obama personally. I met him in Chicago University when he was teaching there. You know what happened when I published my book, the Islamic State, the digital caliphate, Islamic State, the digital caliphate, which was bestseller in this country and in the United States. I was invited by the publisher to have, or signed a contract actually, to have a touring, lecturing tours around the United States universities. Harvard, Columbia, Georgetown, Chicago, all of them, and I was denied a visa. Seriously, okay, I'm going to talk about the Islamic State, not about Palestinian issue, which is very sensitive for them. I wasn't given a visa. I'm still waiting for a visa for the last 4 years, and I don't think I will have it.
Even though your book was a bestseller.
It was a bestseller.
The author was not allowed in to speak to it.
George, it was printed by University of Southern California Press, which is the most prestigious or one of the most prestigious universities. If there is anything which is a hate campaign or something like that, if there is anything which is, not scientific or not actually proper or not well researched, they wouldn't publish it. Universities there, and we know universities in this country, and we know the editors. When you supply, actually a draft of your book, they ask you for every details. So what my question is to you, George, or to also the audience here: where shall we go? How can we express ourselves in a very scientific way, in a very proper way? The social media now and the experts are saying that it is censored. And, the governments are actually not all blocking our sites or our online newspaper. They are also tarnishing our image. It's the hate campaign against us. The social media saying that we are against the hate campaign, So, but what about the hate campaign against us as writers, as journalists, as academic? This is the problem we are facing, to be honest. Saudi Arabia, actually, United Arab Emirates, other wealthy Arab countries, they are investing. They are helping these kind of companies. They are using it simply because they got the money. But the question is, why President Donald Trump having a dinner party for the owner of the Facebook? Why he is inviting him to the White House and having dinner with him to discuss what? Definitely censorship, more censorship against us. What are going to do to face this catastrophe? I came to this country hoping that I will find the freedom of expression. I can have, a safe country to express my point of view. I'm sorry to say that, not anymore.
Mike, the answer obviously is to let 1,000 flowers bloom, isn't it? After all, these platforms they're not there as a social service. They're there to make profits, and they make fabulous profits. Or at least, even when they don't make profits, their value grows.
Social media isn't free. People get involved with social media as owners in the same way as people buy newspapers to get influence. But let's be practical, and let's just reflect on what we've been saying. Some very interesting stuff said in this conversation. First, all of us today feel we're being more controlled. Perhaps we're just waking up to the control that was always there. But we feel controlled, and indeed, in real terms, we are controlled. Now, practically speaking, I think we have to shame the social media companies into declaring their protocols of censorship and control. Tell us what they're doing. If they're going to censor, what are the rules? Because at the moment, all this is happening quietly. It's all happening covertly. We don't know why they take things down. We come to our page and it's not there anymore. We don't know. They are playing with us. And they are also impacting upon our political processes, on our democracy, because they can influence people. Facebook and the other big social media companies have developed a new science. It is nothing less than that. It is the science of influence and control, to make people do whatever you want them to do.
Can we sue them? Why we can't sue them? You know, when they, for example, this is my business. You know, I earn my living from that. So when they block my page or block my newspaper, can I go and sue them in such a free world, for example?
And it is so frustrating when they do that, when you fall victim to their control and there's absolutely nothing you can do. But this is a start. We've got all these people talking about it, and if more people talk about it and demand change, something just might happen.
Well, personally, what my takeaway from this discussion is that I should get my typewriter out again and my oil drum full of ink, because quite clearly, whatever freedom we currently have cannot be depended upon, and we may have to go back to older ways. Last word to you, sir. How, look forward, what can we do about this?
The best way currently to do something about this is, one, register your website in a country that has relatively more freedom. Register your website there. Don't register it in the UK or any of the Western countries. For a start, you will give more people access. So do not go for the standard domains, .coms, .co.uk's, things like that. Register your domain elsewhere and it's hosted elsewhere. You can do that. It's all free. Secondly, on social media, right, do not share your thoughts. Rather, share where your thoughts reside elsewhere. So just share a URL. Please read my article here. Right? You're less likely to be blocked. Do not leave your content on there. That's the most important thing. Thirdly, when using a mobile phone, be very, very careful. Turn off everything that you can. When you download an application, disable location information, disable access to cameras. So some applications can actually start using your camera whilst even when your phone's locked, right? So disable all of these things. Only download an application that you desperately need. Get rid of everything else.
Fascinating and good advice, I'm sure. It's been marvellous for me. I hope it was for you. I've been George Galloway. This has been Kalima Horra. Thank you very much. Thank you all.